And this is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, you know, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term. And maybe it worked out for the moms and dads, though I'm skeptical, but it really didn't work out for the kids of those marriages. And I think that's what all of us should be honest about, is we've run this experiment in real time, and what we have is a lot of very, very real family dysfunction that's making our kids unhappy.
I'm sure that there's some people who watch my videos and wonder why I don't do videos of me going to nightclubs or beaches, public places, and rizzing up girls in Japanese, something that I'm fully capable of doing. Instead, I speak on topics like male-female dynamics, especially back home, or even the fact that I'm monk. Well, these are things that I will speak to later in this video, but the topic of no-fault divorce is one that's near and dear to me, and over the next few months, we'll have a lot of pearl clutching and reactions like this.
I'm sorry, but was that man actually stating that divorce is worse for children than a violent marriage? And usually if there's domestic violence against the mother in a marriage, there's also child abuse. Pretty sure both of those traumas are worse than divorce.
You write about adverse childhood consequences.
Sure.
That some kids suffer.
Yep.
In growing up. Being sworn at, insulted, or humiliated by your parents.
Sure. Check.
Being pushed, grabbed, or having something thrown at you.
Check.
Having parents who are separated or divorced.
Check.
Living with an alcoholic or a drug user.
Check.
Living with someone who is depressed or attempted suicide.
Check.
Watching a loved one be physically abused.
Check.
You're batting 1,000.
Yeah.
Anyone that's known me since my youth would say that I've always leaned very strongly liberal, quote-unquote Democrat, since I can remember. Even in my advancing age, I'm quite liberal on quite a number of policies, except one, and that is the family. I lean strongly conservative there. And I have seen, not just in America, but in the country I'm in Japan, as goes the family, so goes society. And so many of the people who are going to be clutching their pearls about J.D. Vance need to listen to the full story of how he got to where he is on the topic of no-fault divorce and preserving family structure.
Vance's father abandoned him. His mother was locked in an endless cycle of drug abuse that escalated to heroin. The toll it took on her young son is seared into memory, like a simple car ride gone wrong.
I said something, or some conversation topic really ignited her temper, and then she just sped up. And she kept on saying, I'm just going to crash this car and kill us both. I'm going to crash this car and kill us both.
JD jumped out of the car and ran for help. Someone called the police, and his mother was arrested. And when you watched them take her, do you remember how that felt?
Honestly, I just felt relieved. In that moment, I just felt relieved. And I thought to myself, all right, I'm going to live another day. That's how terrified I was. I mean, I just wanted that situation to end. And then I just broke down, right? I remember I was just really sad and felt very lonely because I'm sitting in the back of this police cruiser. They've just arrested my mom. The relief of having survived another day was gone. And then I just wanted, then I just wanted somebody to come and take me away, and that was actually Lindsay. That was who. Sorry.
Why does that particular moment bring tears?
I don't intend to be political on this channel, and so I try to avoid it as much as I possibly can, but there's one thing that remains unavoidable, and it is that as goes the family, so goes society. We see that as families stick together and function well, society does better. There's less crime, people do better in school, people cooperate and get along better. And as that breaks down, we have the opposite take place. And in J.D. Vance's story, what we're hearing is the story of a boy longing for stability as a kid in a stable family. And you can hear how much he was hurt by his experience. And very much so is probably the reason why he is a strong proponent of strong family.
One, it's just such a crystal clear memory, and so it's hard almost not to feel the same way that I felt as a 12-year-old kid sitting in the back of that police cruiser.
But I also think that that moment is kind of a microcosm of my entire life, is that there was this brief moment of terror and of feeling really lonely, and then there was Lindsay.
I would die for that kid.
I'm sure that there are those who would ask questions about why I make the particular content that I make, especially being overseas in Japan, where I could simply make content of just going up to girls in public places and rizzing them up in Japanese. Instead, I'm a monk, and it's because of this situation. Technically, I'm married. I'm still married. But my wife is now estranged because she just wasn't feeling me anymore, I guess. And so we were in a situation where technically in the States, she could have just walked away and I would have had to pay for everything and lose custody of my daughter. And I would be bemoaning the fact that I have to fight to see my daughter, who you saw earlier, playing tennis. I couldn't see her on a regular basis. Instead, what they have here is not necessarily a no-fault divorce, but a no-want divorce, which is basically our situation. I don't want to be with you. I'm going to go live over here. You're going to live here. We're going to work out an arrangement so that our child is on certain days with you, on other days with me, and we move forward in that particular situation. And we're technically still married. But what we're not doing is fighting every day in front of our child. And I'm not in a situation which I would have been in America, where I'm fighting tooth and nail to see my kid. Instead, we have a somewhat healthy co-parenting situation. And I guess you'd have to ask my daughter if she's happy with that. But we're not at each other's necks trying to pit one parent against the other, because quite simply, this country protects the rights of marriage. And that is an issue that I see as extremely pertinent in this next election, because families are what keep society together. Not am I happy, and if I'm not happy, I'm going to blow my family up.
So this point about culture, which is a really, really difficult and amorphous concept to define. And one of the things that I was trying to do with Hillbilly Elegy is try to, in some ways, draw the discussion away from this structure versus personal responsibility narrative and convince us to look at culture as a third and I think very important variable. Because I often think that the way that conservatives, and I'm a conservative, talk about culture is in some ways an excuse to end a conversation instead of starting a much more important conversation. It's look at their bad culture, look at their deficient culture, we can't do anything to help them, instead of trying to understand culture as this much bigger social and institutional force that really is important, that some cases can come from problems related to poverty, in some cases can come from a host of different factors that are difficult to understand. So
much of the Passport Bro talk is about where you can meet women, how you can meet women, where's the best place you can go, how I get women, and okay, there's place for that. But on my particular channel, I wanted to talk about what I see in this country, Japan, and it is that families make this place go. That much of the policing of society is governed by people on the individual and the family level. And so when there's a problem with a student that's not doing well in school, you bring the mom and the dad, you have a 3-person conference, they speak about what the child needs, and those parents go home and change the child's behavior so that that child can grow up and be functional in society, as opposed to, oh, my kid feels a certain way, and so the society around her or him is the problem. And what you get is, in America, people aren't getting married, people are complaining more than ever that the other sex is the problem. And then in Japan, of course, they're having a declining birth rate, but you still have civility, you have stability, you have safety. And it speaks to why J.D. Vance is so hung up on the institution of the family.
One of the most important, I think, cultural problems that I talk about is the prevalence of family instability and family trauma in some of the communities that I write about. And I take it as a given that that trauma and that instability is really bad, that it has really negative downstream effects on whether children are able to get an education, whether they're able to enter the workforce, whether they're able to raise and maintain successful families themselves. Now, I think it's tempting to sort of look at the problems of family instability in families like mine and say there's a structural problem. If only people had access to better economic opportunities, they wouldn't have this problem. I think that's partially true, but also consequently partially false. I think there's a tendency on the right to look at that and say these parents need to take better care of their families and of their children, and unless they do it, there's nothing that we can do. And I think, again, that is maybe partially true, but it's also very significantly false. And what I'm trying to point to in this concept of culture is we know that when children grow up in very unstable families that it has important cognitive effects. We know that it has important psychological effects. And unless we understand the problem of family instability and trauma, not just as a structural problem or a problem of personal responsibility, but as a long-term problem, in some cases inherited from multiple generations back, then we're not going to be able to appreciate what's really going on in some of these families and why family instability and trauma is so durable and so difficult to actually solve.
Right now, couples in all 50 states who want to end their marriage can get what's called a no-fault divorce. Neither side has to prove that the other did something wrong, like committing adultery, abandoning their spouse, or treating them cruelly. But some Republican lawmakers in a handful of red states want to get rid of it. They say it makes divorce too easy, and they say it's unfair to men since it's estimated that 69% of divorces in the United States are initiated by women. So, Joanna, what's the history of no-fault divorce? Where did it come from, and why did it come into being?
So California was the first state to adopt no-fault in 1969 after about 200 years of every state using fault-based divorce. And it came about because California studied it and found something that probably most people in the field already knew, which is that the system didn't work, that fault-based divorces were often involved perjury and fabrication, that people were fleeing their jurisdictions to get divorced, and that it did very little to sort out between good marriages and bad marriages.
And what's been the result? What's changed because of it?
So when no fault was first adopted in California, it then sort of started a revolution. And within 15 years, every single state had either switched completely to a no-fault system or added at least one no-fault ground. We saw some early effects, one of which was that the system of divorce became less troubled. There were fewer cases of obvious perjury and fabrication, etc. There were people who got out of marriages where they had been stuck. And then we also saw some real impacts on women. The female suicide rate went down dramatically. The female homicide rate by intimate partners went down dramatically, and the rate of domestic violence went down. Those were somewhat unexpected results, but very, very clear impacts of the change.
You don't have to look around very hard to see that not just in America or in the West, but in most developing nations, that not only is the marriage rate dropping, but the number of children people are having in wedlock or overall period is dropping as well. And generally speaking, the narrative for that is that men need to step up. They need to be better men than men used to be. And of course, it was men oppressed women in the past. And if only men could rise to the lofty expectations that more and more young ladies have, would the marriage rate go up. But we're living all together on this planet, so we have to find some solution in order to build families again. But it's the argument for no-fault divorce that is lacking, and it's what prompts many guys, specifically in this space, to support the repealing of it.
It did make it easier to get divorced, but for the most part, people were getting divorced anyway. It's just they were jumping through hoops to do it. And what we have found is that no fault is a better fit for our society's ideas about marriage. People actually want to get divorced because they think so highly of marriage. And if the marriage is disappointing, they want to be able to get out and often go on to a new marriage.
There are two kinds of political protest, in my opinion. There's the protest where you say what you will do or what you won't do, who you support or who you don't support. But then there's the actual protest that I believe is the one that matters the most, and it's what you choose to do or what you choose not to do. And part of my quote-unquote political protest is that, quite simply, I will not have a child with an American woman. And it's not because I have issues specifically with American women. I have issue with American law when it comes to dissolving divorces. If I'm going to have to fight to see my children by default, then no, I will not have children in a system like that.
What do you make of the argument that no-fault divorce deprives men of due process because most divorces are initiated by women?
So divorces have always been initiated more often by women, going back all the way to the very first divorce laws in after the Revolution. And that's by and large because marriage is an institution that works less well for women than it does for men. The idea of a due process claim is pretty weak, because what they're really saying is that a man has a right to stay married to someone over her objection. There is no recognized support in the law for that kind of a concept.
When you raise someone to the vice presidency like J.D. Vance, who has clearly spoken of no-fault divorce, it is clear that it's going to be a central point of conversation in the next couple of months. But what you're going to hear is many young ladies misrepresent the point, much like this lawyer is doing, by saying that men want women to stay in miserable marriages. And that's simply not the truth. The truth is that most men would have no problem with a don't want divorce or a no want divorce. You don't want me? You can take what you have that's your own. You can leave. We'll have an equal child custody separation agreement, and you go live over there and do what you want to do, and I live here and do what I want to do, and we keep it moving. Most guys would support that. If you want to be with your boyfriend in your apartment or his apartment, and I want to stay here, or either I leave somewhere and I get 50-50 custody and you don't rake me over the coals because you're not happy, maybe I'll have a child with you in that kind of situation. But this situation now, count me out.
So I think what they're frustrated with is this feeling that maybe women have too much autonomy and too much power, and that changing the divorce laws might be a way to pull that back. But I think there's really very little relation between the two.
Leading Republicans in Washington and in the most influential conservative advocacy groups to start their plans for a national abortion ban, for birth control restrictions, for even things like a ban on pornography, a ban on no-fault divorce. It is a wild record on which to try to build a return to power.
In my 20 plus years in this country, I've had my ups and downs with Japan, but I don't complain about them publicly because, one, it's just a sign of disrespect to the country that you're in my opinion, to complain about it as a guest. And of course, complaining is not going to change anything. But the main reason why I don't complain about this country is quite simply, when I went into that family court, I was afraid that I was not going to see my daughter. But when I walked out and they said, in this country, as a husband, you have the right to be the father to your child, regardless of if your wife is happy or not with you, I was instantly sold in this country. I'll have more kids in this country if I have the opportunity to. And secondly, I'll never, ever have children in America as long as you have no-fault divorce. A woman can wake up unhappy one day and I got to fight to see my kids. You can take that game somewhere else. I'm not playing it. And there are going to be more passport OGs that walk away from that game until you guys fix those laws. Because quite simply, me having my child in Japan, it saved my life. If I had to fight for my daughter, to see my daughter while I'm watching all of these women twerk and have kids in situationships and be unhappy and calling men weak and saying that we don't need men, I could not watch my daughter turn into a woman that did not like men when I love my daughter with all of my heart. If that's the system you're going to have, then you're going to have to find other men to make it go, because I can't do that. I can't watch my daughter growing up hating men. And I can't watch my daughter growing up into a woman that devalues family, because it is disservice to every single ancestor that came before, not only me, but her. Change the laws, or you're going to have to find different men, because men like myself, not playing the no-fault divorce game. No-want divorce, that's a game I might play. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. Catch you in the next video. Take care, guys.